image like no other, inspiring decades of research and debate. The Shroud of Turin, that's a piece of history, and it has an ongoing puzzle for scientists.
What if the Shroud of Turin is not just an old piece of cloth, but contains a story almost 2,000 years old, one that even modern science still cannot fully explain? A faint image of a person can be seen on this linen cloth, and it looks as if someone was wrapped in it after being crucified. But the surprising thing is that there are no clear signs of normal paint or brush marks. For centuries, some people have connected it with Jesus Christ, while others have considered it a very clever medieval forgery. But now the matter is not limited to faith and doubt. Research into DNA, pollen, blood, X-rays, and the fibers of the cloth has raised questions that are not so easy to answer. So what is the real story of this cloth? Was it really made in the Middle Ages, or is its story much older? And if it is that old, how did traces from different parts of the world get into its fibers? To find out the answer, make sure you stay until the end of the video, because one clue coming ahead takes the whole story in a different direction. Before moving ahead in the video, please subscribe to the channel so you can watch such videos first. And this is where the first major scientific crack in this mystery appeared. It was May 28, 1898. A public exhibition of the Shroud of Turin was taking place in Turin. During this time, a person was allowed to take a photograph of the shroud. He probably never imagined that the photograph he took would make this mystery even deeper in the years to come. His name was Secondo Pia. Pia was a lawyer and a city councillor by profession, but he was also very interested in photography. At that time, photography was not as easy as it is today. There were no mobile phones and no way to see a picture instantly. Cameras were large and heavy, and taking a photograph required a lot of care. Pia carried his heavy camera to the shroud and climbed onto a high platform to take the photograph from the right position. He took pictures on two large glass plates, each about half a meter wide. Inside the dark church, strong lamps and magnesium flash powder were used for light. But the real surprise was still to come. That night, Pia went into his dark room. There was only red light there, and he slowly began developing the photographic plate. As the image started to appear, Pia was shocked. According to him, he was so surprised that the plate almost fell from his hands. The figure visible on the shroud was blurry and unclear. But on the negative plate, a clear human face suddenly appeared. The eyes were closed, an injury could be seen on the nose, the mustache and beard were clearly visible, and there were also marks of injury on the cheek. This was not just a photograph. For the first time, it made people think about how this image on the shroud had actually been created. But the real question was not why the photograph looked so clear. The real question was why the image on the cloth behaved in such a strange way. To understand this, it is first important to know what a normal photo negative actually is. Imagine a photo where the face is in the light and the background is dark. In a negative, the opposite will appear. Where there was light, there will be darkness, and where there was darkness, there will be light. If a painting is turned into a negative in the same way, it would normally look strange, reversed, and sometimes almost like a mask. But something different happened with the shroud. When Secondo Pia prepared the negative of the photograph of the shroud, the blurry figure suddenly looked like a real human face. The shape of the face, its depth, and the proportions of the body appeared quite natural. It seemed as if the image on the cloth itself was behaving like a photographic negative. And this raised a big question. If the shroud was made in the Middle Ages, how could a person at that time understand the principle of a negative image? Photography was still almost 800 years away from being invented. At that time, there was no camera, no negative plate, and no way for an artist to see the result of an image beforehand. So how was such a complex and natural image created? After this, scientists began examining the shroud in different ways. Techniques such as X-ray, ultraviolet, infrared, and laser scanning were used. But slowly, scientists realized that perhaps the most important clues were not visible on the surface of the image at all. The real story might have been hidden in things that could not be seen with the eyes: dust, soil, pollen, and extremely tiny biological particles that had been trapped between the fibers of the shroud for centuries. If the face was not just an image, then perhaps its fibers also contained a story. And the next clue could not be seen with the eyes at all. So why did it behave like a negative? Until now, scientists were trying to understand the image visible on the shroud. But around 2015, the investigation moved in a completely different direction. This time, the question was not about the image, but about the extremely tiny particles hidden between the fibers of the shroud. Professor Giulio Fanti and researchers connected with Padua University, along with genetics and biology teams, started examining the biological traces connected to the shroud. Their goal was not to find any kind of divine DNA. They simply wanted to know where this cloth had been, who had touched it, and which populations it had come into contact with over the centuries. For this, researchers used sterile micro-vacuum equipment. These had extremely small filters that could collect dust, pollen, and biological debris trapped between the threads, as well as particles from the surface of the cloth. They also included some samples collected during the 1988 restoration in their investigation. But there was one major problem here: contamination. Imagine that a small piece of a researcher's skin, their breath, a sneeze, or even a skin cell from a technician or priest reaches the sample. The entire DNA result could be affected. That is why the samples were taken to a very clean laboratory environment for testing. After this, next-generation sequencing, or NGS technology, was used. Special attention was given to mitochondrial DNA. Its special feature is that there are many copies of it in a cell. It is passed down through the mother, and it can survive for a relatively long time in old samples. Because of this, it can help give an idea about different populations and their geographical connections. For several days, computers processed millions of nucleotide sequences. These were then compared with genetic databases from around the world, HLA groups, and ancestral lineages. Scientists were hoping that they would get a direct and simple answer, but the pattern appearing on the computer screen was not the genetic signature of one person. Now, the most surprising thing was coming in front of the scientists. If the shroud was really made in medieval Europe, then its DNA should mainly show European signals. And if it came from ancient Jerusalem, then Middle Eastern ancestry should have been much clearer. But the data that appeared was not so straightforward. First, signals connected with the Middle East were found. Some haplogroups were said to be connected with the Druze population, which is associated with areas such as Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Because the Druze population remained relatively separate for a long time, its genetic history is also considered quite unique. Then signals from Western Europe appeared. Haplogroups such as U5b and H1 to H3 were also found. There could be a simple reason for this. The shroud had been in Europe since the 15th century, first in Chambéry and later in Turin. It was handled by poor Clare nuns, kept safe by the House of Savoy, and came into contact with countless pilgrims. So finding European DNA was not, by itself, a very big mystery. But the story did not stop there. Signals connected with North and East Africa, such as L3 and M1A1, were also reported, and these were connected with regions such as Egypt and Ethiopia. Some researchers also viewed this as possible contact with old Christian communities. And then the signals from South Asia and East Asia made the question even bigger. Markers such as M39, M56, and R8 were said to be connected with the Indian subcontinent, while markers such as D4 and G2A are found in East Asian or Chinese-associated populations. Now think about it. How did signals from the Middle East, Europe, Africa, India, and East Asia all end up on the same cloth? If this was a forgery made in France around 1350, then how did so many different geographic signals get there? But perhaps the DNA was not telling us where the shroud was made. Maybe it was telling us where the shroud had been. Until now, the DNA story seemed like this. Traces from people from different parts of the world had slowly collected on the same piece of cloth. But if that was the case, it did not simply mean that many people had touched the shroud. It was possible that the cloth itself had also gone on a long journey. Some early Byzantine, Syriac, and Arabic sources mention a cloth that was folded in such a way that only the face could be seen. There are also references to it being displayed in a special frame. Some sources connect this kind of folded cloth with something called tetadiplon. The alleged journey starts in Jerusalem and then reaches Edessa. It is believed that around the 2nd century, this cloth reached Edessa and was kept hidden inside the city walls for some time. But Edessa was not it was located on a very important route of the Silk Road. Merchants and caravans coming from China, India, Persia, and Arabia passed through here. Pilgrims and diplomats also came and went. If this cloth was considered something sacred at that time, then the number of people who came close to it would not have been small. Someone may have touched it, someone may have breathed near it, and hair or skin cells from someone may have fallen onto it. Sweat and other microscopic particles may also have slowly collected inside the fibers of the cloth. If we think about it this way, the shroud is no longer just an old piece of cloth. It becomes a kind of traveling biological archive, with small traces of human contact from every place and every period slowly collecting inside it. But if this cloth really continued traveling for such a long time, the next question was there any other scientific evidence besides DNA that also pointed toward the same journey? If this story of the shroud's journey is correct, then its next major stop is believed to be Constantinople. It is said to have remained there from around 944 to 1204. At that time, Constantinople was the center of the Byzantine Empire and was considered one of the largest cities in the world. People from different parts of the world came and went here. Merchants, soldiers, travelers, religious people, and diplomats, all kinds of people were present in this city. So if the shroud stayed there for a long time, the possibility of continuous human contact with it makes sense. According to some historical sources, Byzantine emperors obtained this relic and kept it under their control. But the biggest turning point in this story came in 1204, when Constantinople was attacked during the Fourth Crusade and the city was badly looted. After this, there is a major gap in the history of the shroud. According to some claims, around 1205, its traces appeared in Athens and Greece. It is also said that after the looting of Constantinople, it came into the hands of French knights and was kept in Athens for some time. Then, around 1353, it appeared in France. It is connected with Geoffrey de Charny. From here, the story of the shroud appears for the first time in clearer historical records in Western Europe. If we look at this entire journey in one line, the picture looks something like this: Jerusalem to Edessa, then along the Silk Road to Constantinople, from there to Greece after the Crusades, and finally to France. But it is important to remember that this entire timeline is a historical reconstruction. Historians do not all agree that every part of it has been proven. Still, if this journey really happened, then history had another witness, not a human, but plants. By now, the story had reached DNA and old historical roots, but scientists found another clue, left not by humans, but by plants. To understand this, scientists studied the pollen found on the shroud. This type of study is called palynology. Professor Avinoam Danin, a botanist connected with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Swiss forensic scientist Max Frey studied the pollen on the shroud in different ways. With the help of adhesive tape, extremely small samples were collected, and researchers looked at which types of pollen were trapped in the fibers of the cloth. In total, 58 different plant species were claimed to have been identified from the pollen. Of these, 17 species were from Europe, which makes sense because the shroud had been in Europe for many centuries. But the other signals were more interesting. Many pollen types were said to be connected with the Middle East, Turkey, and the Anatolian steppe. In other words, their distribution appeared to match the old route that passed through Jerusalem, Edessa, and Constantinople. Then the name of one particular plant came up: Gundelia tourneforti. It is a thorny desert plant from the thistle family. Its pollen was reported to be present in a large amount, almost half of the samples. This plant is found in and around Jerusalem and blooms in spring, around the time of Passover. This is where the crown of thorns theory came back into discussion. Another plant, Zygophyllum domosum, was also considered important. It is found in limited areas such as the Jewish desert and the Sinai Peninsula. Now the question was, did this pollen simply collect on the cloth because it passed through those areas? Or did someone deliberately put it there while creating the image? Pollen is not considered easy to replicate or place like paint in whatever way you want. But pollen could only tell scientists which environments the cloth had passed through. Now scientists had to find out what the red marks on it actually were. Until now, the pollen found on the shroud had pointed toward a story. But now scientists turned their attention to the red marks, which at first glance looked like blood. The question was simple. Was it really blood, or had an artist created these marks with paint? For a long time, skeptics said that red ochre, cinnabar, or tempera could have been used to create these marks. Some theories even suggested that a medieval artist could have mixed pigments with gelatin to create the entire image. But in 2017, Italian researchers led by Giulio Fanti examined these marks again. Doctors connected with a hospital in Trieste were also part of this investigation. Scientists used techniques such as transmission electron microscopy and Raman spectroscopy to examine the material at a very small nanoscale level. According to them, what they found was not an ordinary pigment. They claimed to find signs of human blood, which they connected with type A blood. They also reported markers such as compounds related to hemoglobin, creatinine, and ferritin. Why are these compounds important? Because creatinine and ferritin can be associated with severe stress on the body, dehydration, and muscle damage. Extreme physical violence can cause muscle breakdown, which is called rhabdomyolysis. This is where the story of Roman flogging also comes into the discussion. Some researchers connected these signs with serious physical trauma that could match descriptions of whipping used during the Roman period. An interpretation involving more than 100 lashes has even been suggested. Another question was, if this is old blood, why does it still look so red? One proposed explanation is that increased bilirubin levels during severe trauma may have affected the normal process that causes blood to become darker. But remember, these findings by themselves do not prove who the person on the shroud was. And now the story was about to face a test that had already raised a major question about the age of the shroud: 1988 radiocarbon dating. By now, many different clues had appeared about the shroud. But in 1988, a test was carried out that almost seemed to end the entire story. It was radiocarbon dating. Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona laboratories examined a small piece of the shroud. The result was that the linen sample tested was dated to around 1260 to 1390 CE. At first glance, this was a clear sign that the shroud could be from the Middle Ages. After this result, the medieval forgery theory became much stronger. For a long time, it was considered the strongest scientific evidence for the age of the shroud. If the date was correct, then the claim that it was almost 2,000 years old seemed difficult to accept. But later, a major question was raised about this sample. The piece from which the sample was taken came from the edge of the shroud. This part had been in contact with people for centuries and had been used quite a lot. That meant there was a possibility of contamination. It was also claimed that there were signs of later repairs in that area. In studies by Raymond Rogers, it was reported that rewoven cotton fibers were found in that area, which were different from the original linen. If that was the case, then it was possible that in 1988, scientists had tested a sample from a repaired section instead of the original part of the shroud. And this became the most important point in the entire controversy. Radiocarbon dating had not directly told the age of the entire shroud. It had only given the age of the small piece that was sent to the laboratory. Now the question was whether that piece was original or a later repaired and contaminated section. If the sample itself was different, then it was natural for the entire dating result to be questioned. But simply questioning the sample was not enough. Scientists now needed a method that could read the molecular structure hidden inside the linen fiber, rather than the outside contamination. After questions were raised about the 1988 radiocarbon dating, scientists faced a new challenge. If the date could be wrong because of the old sample, then what other way was there to find out the age of the shroud? This is where the 2022 study by physicist Liberato De Caro and his team came into the discussion. They used a technique called WAXS, or wide-angle X-ray scattering. Now, let's understand this in simple language. Radiocarbon dating tried to find the age of a particular sample, but the WAXS method was a little different. It looked at how the linen fiber had changed internally over time. Linen fibers are made of cellulose. Over hundreds or thousands of years, things such as radiation, humidity, and temperature slowly change the internal structure of these fibers. In other words, the fiber keeps some signs of the passing of time inside itself. Because of this, it can be understood as a kind of molecular clock. In De Caro's analysis, the linen of the shroud was compared with old and medieval textiles from different periods. This included linen samples connected with archaeological sites such as Masada from the 1st century. According to their results, the fibers of the shroud showed physical characteristics more similar to much older textiles than to medieval European textiles. If this interpretation is correct, then the story becomes confusing again. On one side, the 1988 radiocarbon dating said that the sample was from between 1260 and 1390 CE. On the other side, the WAXS analysis appeared to point toward the possibility that the shroud's fibers were much older. In other words, the two tests were not telling the same story. But one biggest question still remained. If this cloth could be so old, then how was the human figure on it actually created? Until now, many questions had come up about the age of the shroud, the DNA found in its fibers, the pollen, and the blood. But even after all of this, one question was still standing. How was this image actually created? Some studies of the image on the shroud have said that the image is formed only on the very top layer of the fibers, up to around 200 nanometers. The important thing is that there are no clear signs of normal paint, ink, or brush strokes. Instead, some kind of chemical change can be seen in the fibers. This is where the mystery becomes even deeper. Some researchers have also suggested that the image could have been created by a process similar to an extremely fast burst of energy. But even today, there is no completely accepted natural or historical process that can explain every feature of this image at the same time. And that is not all. Some imaging studies have suggested that there are certain 3D properties inside the image, where a connection can be seen between the intensity of the image and the distance between the body and the cloth. In other words, where the distance between the body and the cloth was different, the intensity of the image may also appear different. This kind of pattern is not normally seen in traditional painting. Apart from this, some X-ray-like details and photographic negative-like behavior have also been discussed in relation to the image. Now, if we put all these clues together, pollen and soil signals connected with Jerusalem, plants that bloom in spring, blood and severe trauma markers, DNA signals connected with different places, the possible historical journey of the shroud, linen dating, and the unusual properties of the image, the picture becomes extremely complicated. Some researchers see all of this as supporting a 1st century origin. But this does not mean that science has proven that this is definitely the burial shroud of Jesus. Many scientists are still cautious about these conclusions. And this is where the entire story reaches its most uncomfortable question. Now let's look back at the whole story once again. In 1898, Secondo Pia's photograph showed for the first time that the shroud's blurry image appeared like a clear human face when seen as a negative. After this, DNA studies claimed to find genetic signals connected with different geographic regions. Then came its possible journey, Jerusalem to Edessa, from there to Constantinople, then Greece, France, and finally Turin. Pollen analysis reported plant signals connected with the Middle East, Anatolia, and Europe. The pollen of plants such as Gundelia and Zygophyllum made the questions about the Jerusalem region even deeper. After this, blood analysis claimed to find human blood, type A, and markers such as creatinine and ferritin, which were connected with severe trauma. But on the other hand, the 1988 radiocarbon dating gave a date between 1260 and 1390 CE. Then Raymond Rogers' studies raised the question that the tested area might have been a repaired or rewoven section. The 2022 WAXS research also claims similarities with older linen. And then comes the biggest mystery, the image itself. Changes in the upper layer of the fibers, 3D properties, and an image formation mechanism that still cannot be completely explained today. Now 2 different pictures appear. According to skeptics, it could be a medieval object in which contamination, human handling, and biological material collected over time. On the other hand, some researchers see these clues as supporting a 1st century origin, an ancient travel route, and evidence connected with Jerusalem. But the question is still the same. Are all these clues telling one story? Or are we connecting different pieces of evidence to create the story we want to believe? The shroud still does not give a direct answer. Science has not ended this mystery. Instead, it has made it even deeper. Perhaps the biggest mystery is not who the shroud belonged to. The real mystery is why this cloth, believed to be almost 2,000 years old, still refuses to reveal the complete meaning of every clue hidden inside it. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stay with us for more mysterious and unsolved stories like this. We will meet again soon.